We Can Be Heroes is a tabletop RPG by Bud Stuff Games, published in 2025 following a successful Kickstarter. It was written by Spencer Reichley and illustrated by Max Baer. In a nutshell, this is a fairly deep D20-based supers RPG that feels really committed to emulating the sort of career or life cycle of a superhero, from street-level hero to mega-powered superhuman. In this video, I want to point out the most promising aspects of this game as gleaned from the player's rulebook and GM's guide, which are actually published as a single 360-page PDF and book. This is more of a first look type of video, so I'm not going to get into extreme detail on any of the rules, but I do want to highlight the rules more than anything, since that's really at the heart of any supers RPG. And then at the end, I'll give you my personal concerns and criticisms about this game overall. This is not a perfect game, and I'll discuss that at the end of the video, but let's go through the reasons that might make it a really great supers RPG. Huge power range. Now, it's up to the GM to scale the challenges that superhero PCs will face, but the progression arc of those PCs does have a huge range. This is more or less a D20 game, and your levels are 1 to 20. By the time you reach level 20, which is very nicely recapped in this level guide, you are a nigh unkillable tank of a character. Familiarity. If you've played a D20 game before or something like D&D 5e, then the idea of rolling a D20 die and then adding a stat bonus and maybe a proficiency bonus, which in this game is called Moxie, should be familiar to you. Also, I like the fact in this game that you don't have a core stat from which a modifier is derived. You just have the modifier. I wish more games did this. Superpowers always hit. The game mechanics ensure that when a player uses a superpower attack or ability, it always hits the target. This design eliminates the frustration of missing with a core character ability and ensures that players feel the impact of their powers. 32 superpowers. So this game is trying to emulate your more mainstream kind of superhero story. Think mainline Marvel and DC heroes. But that means it still has to cover a lot of ground. As far as your character's main power, there are 32 to choose from across 6 ability archetypes. Each one of these archetypes comes with one so-called innate ability, which gives you one battle-related advantage or another. Well, usually battle-related. And then each of the actual powers has 5 tiers. You can get multidisciplinary in this game in terms of choosing other superpowers, but if you branch out, then you won't get the ultimate power at the end of any of the powers. These ultimate powers are usually pretty over the top and designed as a sort of reward to players for sticking to their one superpower. I guess the big question here is this enough powers? Do they cover enough ground to make this a comprehensive supers RPG? I'm not a huge comic book nerd, so I couldn't say for sure, but this list of powers and the fact that there are 5 levels for each probably covers a vast majority of what you could want for your PC. If you can think of a superpower that you would genuinely want for your PC that's not listed here, leave it down in the comments. I'd love to hear what this list is missing. 14 secondary powers. At the risk of maybe making your character sheet too complicated, but also bringing more player options, you're given a secondary superpower at level 3, and each of these also has 5 levels as you progress in character level. I think these are important for giving players things to do other than use their main superpower over and over, and they offer the satisfaction of getting better over time. 10 groups of auxiliary powers. Okay, this might be getting a bit ridiculous. Your character also gets an auxiliary power. You get one at level 2 and can either choose a new one or upgrade an existing one 4 more times as you level up through level 17. Now, there are 10 groups of auxiliary powers, but in each group, there are anywhere from 5 to 14 actual powers to choose from. At this point, I'm sure you've noticed the nature of this game. I wouldn't call it crunchy exactly, but it's got a lot of mechanical fiddliness, reminiscent of early RPG design in the 80s and 90s. There's nothing objectively good or bad about this design approach. Everyone has their preferences when it comes to RPGs, but you have to come into this game expecting to want some fairly serious rules minutia. Public merit system. Something that feels pretty fresh and innovative is the public merit system, where every PC's actions and accomplishments are constantly scored along 6 floating scores. There is literally a scorecard where the heroes are constantly being rated along 6 aspects of society through the lens of public image. As the PCs increase their public merit, they can unlock little perks here and there, but interestingly, this merit is actually spent as the currency of the game. You can spend merit on all kinds of things: a new contact, intel, favors from NPCs, and maybe most strangely, buying and upgrading equipment. There's no actual money in this game. Instead, if you want gear that the GM isn't going to give you for free, you have to buy it with public merit points. I think this just means the GM needs to let those points flow freely, and that makes it a major aspect of the game. The tricky part, I guess, would be to not award too many or too few points over the course of a campaign. Infinite gadgets. The game provides several dozen different gadgets, but the more interesting players are expecting a certain kind of player, one who is really thinking hard about their equipment and its impact on the scene. Again, this game is really focused on rules minutia. Action points for combat. Combat is designed around spending 6 action points per turn. You can use 3 points to do a primary action, like use a superpower or other attack. 2 points will give you a secondary action, which covers a wide range of things in combat like disarming or evading. Countermeasures also cost 2 action points, and there are various other actions that have various AP costs depending on their description. It's weird because the combat section of the game is actually really short, and this is because most of the rules are contained in individual power and item descriptions. As far as the action points system itself, it's an approach known to afford more tactical decision making in combat. The action economy is literally an economy of points that players have to resolve every single turn of combat. And that's nice if you're thirsting for a supers game with more tactical heft. Super team combos. There's some attention spent to allowing parties to combine their superpowers and deliver enhanced effects. You can tell just from this table that executing a team combo is a very transactional affair where you have to spend a certain amount of action points, a resource called Hero's Favor, to execute it. The end result is really just a bonus to everyone's individual superpower usage on a turn-by-turn basis, but the hope is that everyone participating will add some descriptiveness to the combo and make it seem special. I just appreciate that there is any team combo mechanic at all. It's a nice touch. A setting if you want it. The book includes about 30 pages describing a whole setting full of urban locations, factions, and key NPCs in case you don't have a setting of your own. I think one of the main advantages of using this setting rather than an established one from published comics is that no one is going to correct you on the canon or lore. It's a completely original setting. Thorough GM section. There are about 130 pages dedicated to teaching you how to create your own setting, as well as your own enemies and NPCs. One spread that I particularly appreciated included guidance on how to handle awarding public merit, which is a potential problem I alluded to earlier. You don't want to give it away too freely, but also if you're too stingy with it as the GM, it could make for a very unsatisfying game experience. And yet, handling it is more of an art than a science. Advice on how to run combat is obviously the most important part of this body of guidance, and this section explains a lot about its approach. One interesting thing to note is that the game uses a hex grid for combat, but each hex represents 20 feet by 20 feet, which is pretty huge. You're definitely looking at a much larger combat zone with this game. Great book construction. The physical book has a vibrant matte cover with spot UV treatment for the title. It's got a grippy feel that you get with some matte finishes. The interior paper is thick and glossy, which adds a lot of weight to the 350-page book. The colors are sharp and clean, and most importantly here, the book is stitch bound, which means it will last a lot longer than your mass-produced glue-bound book. And that makes the pages lay flat. It's a properly made book. So, alright, here are my personal cons about this game. This is just my personal opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. Rules minutia. I mentioned it several times, but basically this comes down to personal preference. I think my biggest concern with games that have a ton of quantified rules for every ability and piece of gear is that it can slow down the pace of play for novice players and GMs. Public merit weirdness. While admittedly pretty innovative, the public merit system could be overwhelming for new players or those unfamiliar with meta currency management in RPGs. And let's face it, public merit is very meta. You can earn it to unlock passive team perks, but also spend it to buy things like a knife or a vehicle. Not for kids. I think the artwork by Max Baer and the fact that it's a game about superheroes might give a casual buyer the impression that kids could play this game. But this game just has too many moving parts for most kids to be able to naturally enjoy. And by kids, I mean maybe aged 14 or younger. Your mileage may vary on this, but that's just the impression I get. It needs more illustrations. This is easier said than done since artwork is expensive, time and space consuming, but I really wanted to see an illustration for every named villain at the end of the book. But anyway, there you have it, a brief look at We Can Be Heroes. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game and how you would receive it both as a player and a GM if it landed on your table. What would you keep? What would you change? And if you're curious about getting this game yourself, I've left a link down below. Thanks as always for watching. I'll see you in the next one.